Welcome everybody. Today I'm going to talk about semi-procedural blueprint actors. And what I mean when I say that is that this is a single blueprint actor that I'm using hierarchical instant static meshes to create multiple instances of a static mesh. And by doing this, you gain some performance improvements by not having thousands and thousands of static mesh actors in your scene, but instead you have a single actor which has its one instance replicated many times. So there are some great performance benefits to this, and let's just get right to it. I'll show you what it can do first, and then I will show you how I did it. So the nice part about this is I created a single blueprint actor, and in that actor you can specify the static mesh itself. You can specify the material that you want to place on the mesh. Now, if you have more than one material on your mesh, you're going to have to accommodate for that in here. You can also change the scale. So you can see if I make this smaller or larger. If I make it larger, they start overlapping, and then you have some visual glitches in there. But this allows you to control the scale. I can control the rotation, whether it's X, Y, or on the Z axis. So if I do the Z axis, you see that I can rotate it however I want. Same with the X and the Y and the X. So you see you can get some pretty interesting effects there, which I really like. I'm using this for level building, and so by doing that, by using this for level building, it allows you to create a lot of different patterns. If you want to do walls or stairs or ceilings, all sorts of things you can do there. So the next thing is the number of rows. So I think you can see that if I just move this back down to one row, so I have a single row of 5 instances, right? So here I have 5 rows in one instance. Let me change this. So if I do 3 instances, what I can say is I want to create, let's say, 2 rows of 3 instances, right? And so by adjusting that, breaks that out. And this row offset, it controls the direction that the rows are going to be created in. So here I'm using the Y, and you can also control the offset. So let's say I wanted 4 rows. So here I can increase how far apart they are, right? Or if I want them very close together. You can choose that. The last thing that I'm going to show you is really cool. So if you've ever done anything in like Blender or anything like that, you can mirror objects. So here I have 3 checkboxes. So if I mirror it on the x-axis, here everything's positive x, so the red arrow. And if you mirror it, it's going to copy it on the negative x. Subsequently, or additionally, what I can do is I can mirror it on the y-axis, and it's going to mirror all of these instances plus the newly mirrored instances for the x. And if I mirror that, it copies them over here. So now you can have things mirrored, and you can get some interesting effects if you do things like change the instance offset on the, let's say, Z axis, right? Now you can get some sort of like a bleacher seating or something like that. One thing to note is the instance offset I have basically means that for every new instance that I create, I add this offset to it. Lastly, you can mirror on the Z axis, and I have a bounds. The bounds is the bounding box dimensions of the mesh that you provided. So if you don't exactly know what size it is, you can look at this and see. So this is 100 units across because it's minus 50 to 50. So that just gives you an idea of how big your mesh is. So let's jump into looking at the blueprint that I used to create this. The first thing is I created just a standard blueprint. I called it repeater. I added a hierarchical instant static mesh. And in the construction script, I call one function, which is called rebuild. If we look at the rebuild function, I'm going to zoom out for just a second, just so you can see the full thing. And in the in rebuild, what I'm doing is, let's look at all the variables. So these are all the variables I created. So the mesh, the material, scale, rotation, instances. So that's a integer. The instance offset's a vector. Same with the rows, row offset, and the bounds, which is a box structure. So in rebuild, let's go through this real quickly. The first thing I do is mesh. If it's valid, I grab its bounding box. I store that away so the user can look at it. I grab clear all the instances out of the hierarchical instance static mesh. Get rid of all those because we're rebuilding everything. Then I go ahead and set the material and the static mesh. So here I set the static mesh. Here I set the material. So that tells us which mesh we're using and what the material is. And then I use I use two for loops, nested for loops. So we're going to go through all of the rows. So from 1 to the row count. And in that loop body, I have another nested or a for loop where I'm creating all the instances. And for each instance, I call a function that I created called mirror instance. Well, I'll show you that in a minute. I pass in the current location. So this is a local variable. It originally starts off as 0, 0, 0. And then every time you add a new instance, we're going to increment the offset or increment the current location by the instance offset. We add them together and then set current. So as we're looping through creating our instances, we're going to keep moving our location around. And then once we're finished creating all of our instances, we complete and we update current to the next row offset. And then we start all over again, building all of its instances. So that's our loop for the rows and for the instances. So now let's look at this function. This is the mirror instance function. This is I'm just going to show you this at sort of the high level. And what this function does is it's going to create a set of locations for the instance that we're creating. And it creates the original location plus all the mirrored instances, depending on the flags that you have set. And then at the very end, it's going to take all of our locations and add them as instances into our hierarchy. So let me show you what each one of these does. Zoom in. So location, we store it to a temporary variable. I have a big sequence here. The very first thing I do is store a location in our array called LOCS. Then what I do is I start checking to see which mirror instances we need to create. So if they want to mirror on the x-axis, I take the location and I multiply it by a static vector I created as a variable, which basically has -1 for the axis that we are mirroring. So this negates it, right? So if we mirror on the x-axis, we multiply by -1 on the X and just by 1 on the Y and Z. So take the location, multiply it, and store that mirrored location in our array. I do the same for the Y. And again, I'm multiplying here by Y, the temporary static variable I created. So here, Y is -1. And for the mirror Z, the static variable is -1 on the Z. And X and Y are 1. So we keep going down. If you've mirrored both X and Y, we also have to add in the mirror of the mirror. It sounds kind of funny, but it's true when you think about it. So basically, if these are both true, I multiply location by the negated versions of X and Y, store that value. I do the same for X and Z. So these negated values here, store that. I do it for Y and Z, and then lastly, I do all 3 of them. So if you're mirroring in all directions, so X, Y, and Z, you have to take the location and negate it on all 3 axes, store that. At the very end, you take your locations, put it in a for each loop, and call add instance. So here we take our hierarchy, add the instances with that location. The rotation is defined by this variable here. The user can set, and the scale, I pass in just a float, and then I cast it to a vector. That way, all 3 numbers in the X, Y, and Z are the same. So that being said, let's go ahead and create some stairs. So I'm going to turn off both of the mirroring. I'm going to tighten up the location a little bit. These look a little more close. Right? Like that. And then what you can do then is just raise up on the Z, so that here's our stairs. The nice part is if you want to add one more stair, you can just go all the way up, right? If you like this kind of content and it helped you today, please consider subscribing and dropping a comment below. That would help me out quite a bit. And I hope you have a great day and a safe day. Bye.